Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Chamber for the 71st day of the 108th Legislature, first session. Our chaplain for today is Senator Myron Dorn. Please rise.
Good morning. Please join me in a word of prayer. Almighty God and Father, we humbly ask for your help and guidance today. We need your strength to love you with our whole heart and love our neighbors as ourselves. We ask for wisdom and insight to be good stewards of the resources of Nebraska. As we work through the many issues before us, and today as we take up the budget, we ask you to give us sound judgment to use these funds for the highest and best causes while caring for the lowest and most needy. Every day, we ask that you would so draw our hearts to you, so guide our minds, so fill our imagination, so control our wills, that we may be totally yours, dedicated to you. We pray you will use us and our work here in the legislature always for your glory and for the good of all your people, through our Lord and Jesus Christ. Amen.
I recognize Senator Dover for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I call to order the 71st day of the 108th Legislature, first session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call.
Record, Mr. Clerk.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
Mr. President, Senator Wayne would correct the journal on page 1209, line starting with Senator DeBoer placed, insert the before nomination and after in.
Thank you. Are there any messages, reports, or announcements? Chair recognizes Senator McKinney.
I object.
State your reason for objection.
I don't think the should be there.
Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney, please approach. Mr. Clerk, for a motion.
Mr. President, Senator Wayne would move to correct the journal in the manner previously described.
Senator Wayne, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. When I tell you the body can move or not move if it chooses to, there are plenty of tools. And just because somebody wants to get up and filibuster all day and we start moving bills, we can still stop things if we choose to in a different manner, or we can still continue to have a debate on everything else. This particular motion, if you turn the page on the journal, 1209, starting with line Senator DeBoer, you'll read 3 lines there. The first line says Senator DeBoer place in her name in nomination. The second line says Senator Brandt place his name in nomination. And the third line says Senator Moser place his name in the nomination. There's inconsistency in grammar when it comes to the journal. What I can tell you is I have 12 pages here that we can correct, which are all debatable motions before we even get on the agenda. People can push their button, like I just did, and talk 3 times. We don't have to get on the budget at all today if we choose not to. If you need time to read the budget, let's have a conversation about what's in the budget. We can do that right now if we choose to. And the budget won't even be heard today or tomorrow, because believe me, in the journal, my staff has already found enough pages that we can keep this going for the next 20 days. Now, people might ask, why am I correcting the journal? Well, one, we have a constitutional duty to make sure the journal and the records are kept in the proper fashion. And if there's any typos, and we can have a long debate because every page contains a Oxford comma, so we can decide which one is grammarly correct in that if we choose to have that conversation. But the reason why I'm doing this is because I continue to look at this budget and I continue to see that we are not investing in people but profits over people. And this is where I draw the line in the sand. Other people continue to draw lines everywhere else, but we are not being fiscally conservative nor fiscally responsible. As far as the actual correction, we could have that debate. I think either we're going to be consistent with the, or we need to remove the from Senator Moser's line, which would be a separate motion that I'll write when somebody else is speaking. And if nobody joins to get in the queue, I can do this by myself all day. And those who don't think it, it's actually very easy for me. And in fact, I think I had on the exact same sweater vest and a different tie when I did it a couple years ago. So when I look at where I'm at in the and again, I'm gonna tell you the exact motion so we can stay kind of on topic, and then my next time I'll venture off on the budget. Senator DeBoer placed her name in nomination. Senator Brandt placed his name in nomination, but then the third one says Senator Moser placed his name in the nomination. Either the should be there or it shouldn't. Senator McKinney objected to my change, saying that the should not be there. Maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. Again, I'll walk you through where we can find these journal corrections. If you go to our main page and you kind of scroll down, it's hidden. You have to go to the clerk's page and click on there, and that's when the journal opens up. This is page 1209. And again, it starts with Senator DeBoer placed her name in nomination. So we can have a fruitful debate, but I think oftentimes we kind of drift off. And so I'm going to drift off right now for a little bit and just say, when I look at the budget, I want to be clear about our prison system. Our prison system is overcrowded. We are going to spend over $300 million, $360 million, a little bit more than that, to build a new prison. And nobody in this body can find me any data point that says that prison will not be full the first day it's open. Nobody. I argued this 2 years ago, and this is kind of why I'm disappointed this year, is I argued this 2 years ago, and we set up a contingency fund for programming, which actually last year was moved to programming, and they started doing programming. But we didn't do the same really this year, and that's where I find disappointing because, again, you look at this year's budget, you'll look at there's a $12.1 million increase for cost of housing supplies and food. That's just the natural cost of inflation. That's going to continue to go up. But then you also look right below in the second paragraph, and I can tell you the line here in a second on what page it's on, but we also increased it 12.1 for salary increases, which also in the next 3 to 4 years is going to go up. So that's a $24 million extra expenditure without a new prison. We build a new prison. We're going to have to staff it. We're going to have to increase programming. And again, it will still be full. So this is not my job. I'll be gone. But you are actually handcuffing yourselves in the future by building this prison without any type of programming change, without any change to parole, without any changes to reentry. You are actually putting a $3 million nugget that you will have to come back and either raise taxes or cut programming to pay for. That's just the facts of where we're at. There is nobody who can project out and tell me that I'm wrong when it comes to this particular issue. The difference between last year and this year is I'm not going to try to hold up the budget and filibuster the entire budget. I'm probably going to make sure we don't even get on the budget. I'm okay with the special session. That's our number one obligation. Our Constitution says we have to pass a budget. It says when we're supposed to too, but sometimes we get there, sometimes we don't. I've researched this, and there's been times that we didn't quite hit the 80th day when we passed our budget, and the skies did not fall, and Nebraska kept on moving. So I'm willing to have a lot of conversations off the mic. I'm willing to look at the budget and figure out what we can do. But when I look at the tax package coming out and I look at the money on the floor, there's essentially no dollars left for anything else. That concerns me. That concerns me when we continue to put profit over people. We are giving corporate breaks, and we are giving breaks to our wealthiest 1%. But we are not helping the voiceless. We are not helping the people who are in prison. We're just hoping for something different. And I can no longer stand back and say, let's hope. I've played good all year. I think I've only been on the mic a couple times. Haven't asked for a whole lot. People say Justin's asking for tons. No, I think Senator McKitty asked for additional money in LB 531. But if you look at our overall surplus, giving an additional $100 million to over 500,000 people in the metropolitan area isn't a crazy request when we're giving 650 million to a canal that serves 500,000 people. So on a per population basis, doesn't seem crazy, 100 to 600. And there are some other things going into East Omaha, like money for, I guess, a nonprofit maybe associated with Creighton or Creighton itself to build those things out. And those are entertainment, and those are great things that'll boost the economy. But you have to remember, Western Nebraska, a third of our budget, actually a little bit more than a third of our budget, comes from the Omaha area. So your property tax relief package comes from our area, a third of it. So, and that's sales and use tax and income tax. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think we have to fundamentally change how we fund education. I also think we have to change our tax structure, which is why I'm a co-sponsor of Epic Tax, because I want to have a conversation about fixing some things. See why I said Epic Tax? Because I saw Senator Urban push his light. So now I'll make sure he's still kind of friendly to me when I say Epic Tax a couple times. But at the end of the day, we'll have a little bit of time here to talk. We'll have a little conversation about the budget. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about PTSD. I think more so than 1024, LB 792, an amendment on the budget, is probably going to have more impact long-term in North and South Omaha than the economic boost. And I'll tell you how I got to the PTSD bill. It was on the climb to Kilimanjaro with Senator Brewer. And it fundamentally thought how I looked at what goes on in North and South Omaha. And I even passed out a little handouts to say that I've been actually thinking about this for over 30 years. I just didn't know the word for it or the concept behind it until that climb on Kilimanjaro. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I appreciate the motion that Senator Wayne brought forward today, and I think it is critical from a learning perspective that we all know that we have an obligation to review the journal and to offer up corrections in a timely manner, because that is the official record of our work together. And the more quickly that we take up those corrections, the fresher our recollection may be in regards to making any edits or changes. Of course, it goes without saying that the rules that we adopted unanimously are available to all to be utilized as they see fit. And I appreciate Senator Wayne's ongoing leadership when it comes to utilization of the rules to effectuate his advocacy, both in terms of fidelity to the journal and in terms of opening up a broader conversation in regards to the budget. So as we have on our agenda today for the first time an opportunity to debate a portion of the budget, primarily the mainline budget bill, I just want to note for the record something that is alarming as we embark upon this debate. Our constitutional obligation to take up almost a $10 billion budget was presented to us yesterday in terms of what the committee proposal was, as many of us were engaged in the important work of the Education Committee package. So we had 24 hours, approximately 24 hours to review the Appropriations Committee proposal for debate beginning this morning. There have been a lot of reasons for delay this session in regards to the ongoing filibuster, but this dynamic cannot be attributed to that. And it is a disservice to the institution and each of us trying to ensure we can carry out our duty to pass a sound and thoughtful budget. And in regards to another note that Senator Wayne sounded, which I concur with, there are fail-safes within the process if our budget does not move forward in regards to special session, in regards to a reversion to the governor's budget, and those safety nets and fail-safes can and should be explored if we're unable to find consensus on this budget proposal put before us. Let me also sound a global note as a former 8-year member of the Appropriations Committee. A budget is a moral document. It says what we value as a state. And as I page through the budget proposal from the Appropriations Committee, and there are good things in there, and I know that they worked hard under difficult circumstances, but let me also sound a clarion call for what this says about the morals presented in this budgetary proposal. It's full of pet projects, it's full of prisons, it steals from the poor, and it plays games to prop up tax cuts for the rich and out-of-state corporations. It puts profit over people. It is an austere budget, which is inappropriate considering the fiscal prosperity that we find ourselves in today. That is unprecedented. It is full of gamesmanship. It is full of gimmicks. It is full of tricks. We shouldn't be raiding cash funds to take care of general fund obligations. We shouldn't be making investments in things like a massive new prison without a plan for criminal justice reform. We shouldn't be allocating hundreds of millions of dollars to reignite a 100-year water war with the state of Colorado. There will be ample time for more discussion on these critical issues, but colleagues, please know, this budget is not a reflection of my morals. This budget is not a reflection of the morals of the state of Nebraska, where neighbor helped neighbors. This budget is about playing politics at its worst. Pet projects, prisons, stealing from the poor, and propping up tax cuts that are unaffordable, inequitable, and unsustainable. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you. Oh, goodness. Thank you, Mr. President. I am going to yield my time in just a moment to Senator McKinney, but first I just want to say that I echo everything that Senator Conrad just said. I spent, I think, around 4 hours yesterday reading the budget on the microphone because I had no other time other than staying up, which I did very late last night reading the budget, got up early this morning to continue reading the budget. There's numerous things that are extraordinarily concerning in this budget, and there's no time. There's no time. I'm literally just discussing with my staff about things that I'm seeing that need an amendment, and there's no time to even have these things drafted. And I have given you all a massive gift of time. Appropriations Committee, all I did was give you time this year. So this is out of line. This is out of bounds. This is really upsetting, and it does a disservice to the people of Nebraska. With that, I would yield the remainder of my time to Senator McKinney.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. Senator McKinney, you yielded 348.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise because I would like to continue the discussion. And I've been actually waiting for this discussion because for the past 3 years, there's been conversations about the prison, but not until this year the Appropriations Committee voted to put the money into the budget. So, I've been looking forward to it. And although I've been looking forward to it, it's actually sad. It is sad because I've heard some of the justification for the prison is NSP is ran down. We need increased programming and things like that. But let's have a real conversation about why NSP is ran down. As I mentioned earlier in the session, the department has deferred maintenance on NSP for the past decade or more and hasn't requested the funds to make improvements. So to me, and I'll make that assumption and I'll just leave it for me, that the department and the last administration intentionally deferred maintenance on NSP to justify the construction of this prison. And if you don't believe me, I'll print out that report of that request 10 years ago, and then I would print out the same report recently this year, asking for the same report about it, but nothing happened. Then I look at this budget and I look at the committee statement, and it's a 9-0 thing from the Appropriations Committee to support the capital constructions and the construction of a prison. Then I go through the budget and go to Agency 46, page 184 to 186. There's nothing in here from the department requesting any funds to be set aside for programming, increased programming, a study on how to improve programming in the prisons. So please, somebody stand up and please give me any justification of why there would be a vote to build something, but there's, because of programming, but the agency isn't requesting programming, and the committee isn't putting any money aside for them to study why programming isn't working, how to improve it, or increase programming. It just is alarming to me. But at the end of the day, we all know, and nobody can stand up, as Senator Wayne said, and say that the prison won't be overcrowded day one. But the prison will take 4 to 5 years to be constructed. There's wars going on, so that might take longer. So that means we need policy changes. We can't vote to support a massive construction project that's gonna burden the state and the taxpayers even more, but not be willing to do policy changes to decrease that burden. And that's what's upon us today and for the rest of this session, is that are we gonna step up and do the right thing and make real policy changes that aren't PC and aren't based in, oh, we can't do this because of fear-mongering tactics by the County Attorneys Association. Step up and be leaders, and let's have this conversation. It's very fun. I'm very excited for it because it's something I've been waiting for.
Senator McKinney, you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Senator Dorn, or Mr. President. But to continue, many people ask, what are the reports? What are the policies that are being proposed and all those type of things? I introduced 5, maybe 6 criminal justice related bills in judiciary this year. And they're massive bills. And they're massive bills because it's not that I think all will get passed. It's massive because nobody could sit in front of me and have a real discussion about any of those bills and tell me everything in those bills is wrong and we shouldn't do it. Nobody could do that. And I would guarantee it. Yeah, I have some ideas that many may view as wild, radical, extreme, going too far. But there's a lot of things in those bills that would assist in changing the system. But because people get so stuck in polarized political conversations and not willing to negotiate, you look over the things that would help. So I'll also implore you, once I get another time on the mic, to go through the criminal justice related bills I introduced this year, or the bill that Senator Wayne is trying to get passed this year, LB 50. We need policy changes. We cannot just build a prison. And I oppose building a prison. And this budget and this conversation justifies it for me, because nobody is going to be intentional about what we're going to construct. Now, if we're going to construct facilities for mental health, substance abuse, workforce, and things like that, and making sure that individuals have skills and things like that when they are released, let's talk about it. But that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to build a big campus somewhere between Omaha and Lincoln and say, hey, we did our job, and then burden the state with a massive new operations costs. Probably can't fill that prison. Tecumseh still be understaffed. They're currently still understaffed and on a 4-3 schedule. And if you didn't know, anybody in Tecumseh, well, not anybody, but a lot of people in Tecumseh haven't seen their families because the families can only come over the weekend, but because they're understaffed, people haven't seen their families in over 2 years. Where are you going to find the labor force for this prison? And also, NSP should not be decommissioned. It should be demolished. I mean, take bulldozers and run it to the ground if y'all build prisons. Literally, it should not be decommissioned, because saying decommissioned just means the department will find a sneaky way to keep it open for whatever reason, minimum security, training, whatever. NSP, if you build a prison, should be demolished. It should be a bulldozer waiting day one that prison open and just running it to the ground. But I would guarantee people will stand up and say, no, we shouldn't do that. But why are we building a prison if no, we shouldn't do that? I'm just baffled, and this budget doesn't reflect, fiscal responsibility at all. There's no money for operations. There's no money for programming. What are we doing here? There's many reports that have been put out since my time in the legislature that speak the ways we can improve our system. But we're not doing it. And you're not going to just shove a prison down my throat without me standing up and fighting against it. So let's have fun today. Let's have fun for the rest of the session, because a prison is wrong, and it's especially wrong when we got starving kids in our state, we got starving families, we have massive poverty in urban and rural communities. We have many other things we could divert $340+ million to. If you decrease poverty, you probably would prevent the trend of people coming in. But, there's no political will to do that either. It's just, let's spend money on massive construction projects so developers can make money and people could feel good about acting like they're tough on crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would yield my time to Senator Wayne if he would like it.
Senator Wayne, you're yielded 450.
Thank you. So I handed out 4 things, and I hope people just don't check out and not pay attention, because this is, I think, fundamental. And typically those who have been around, when I talk and I take time, we actually talk about important things, and I try to make sure we engage in a conversation. And so the things I handed out was an article by Omaha World Herald, article April 2nd, 2023, about gun violence across Omaha and then across the state. I ended out a KETV article, and this was probably one of the toughest situations I've ever been in. I was coaching this young man when this man was murdered, and it says police identified teen shot on Wednesday. And then I had to write a eulogy at his funeral. This was probably the hardest thing I ever wrote. But the last thing I handed out was actually a speech that I wrote in 8th grade at King Science Center. And what's interesting, and I'm going to read this into the record later on, but what's interesting is when you read this, and if you don't believe this was written in the 8th grade at King Science Center, I would have my staff bring up my scrapbook that I did in high school, and you will see that in there. And on the second page is actually a picture of me that was in the scrapbook on the same page. This is actually 2 copies of the scrapbook that I created. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got here and why I think it's so important and why it connects to prison. So if anybody wants to talk on the mic, I want to stay focused on, and I'm asking as a courtesy to stay focused on PTSD and corrections and the connection. Because what I wrote about in 8th grade, when you read that, and then when I think about where I'm at today when it comes to judiciary chair, there's a direct connection between the violence that young kids see and those who are back in prison. And if we want to break the cycle of violence, yes, economic development helps with good paying jobs, but we also got to get to the core of what's really going on in some of these kids' minds, and it's around PTSD, and they just didn't know it. And here I was in 8th grade, seeing kids that I know got killed, and then trying to talk about it. And so what this 8th grade speech actually was is I didn't know what to talk about. And so I literally went around to 7th and 8th graders that I knew and said, if you can change one thing in Omaha or in your neighborhood or in your life, what would it be? And what you see is their one thing throughout this entire thing in 8th grade. These are 8th graders at King Science Center and a couple 7th graders who every line item in there, everything in there is not a Senator Wayne's original thought. It was another kid, my peer, who said, this is the one thing they wish they could change or they wish would be in their life. And when you think about that and you think about somebody saying can sleep through the whole night instead of waking up to a crying out your name because of a flashback or a dream that you were stabbed, I know exactly which kid that was and who I still talk to today she is 45. 44, I'm 43. I forgot how old I was. So these are actual people that I can go through and tell you who they were and what they were. And what's crazy is I didn't even think about this until, I'll tell you how it came together. It came together
One
was,
minute.
am I next in the queue?
Yes.
All right, you can just keep it going. How this came about was on Kilimanjaro, Senator Brewer and I started having a conversation about war zone and what it was to be in a war. And then we started talking about PTSD and what the Army was doing from people who were coming back to America and how they were transitioning and how soldiers who were 18, 19, 24 would hear gunshots. And when they came back to America, they couldn't stop sleeping with the gun under their pillow, or they would wake up in the middle of the night when they heard certain things. And somewhere the next day, we started having another conversation. I remember we were having tea, and I said, you know, that's no different than North Omaha. And if an 18, 25, 30-year-old in a war zone is struggling on how not to commit a crime when they—
Senator Wayne, but you are next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Struggling with how not to commit a crime, how does an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old deal with it here in North Omaha? And last year I didn't bring it because we were focused on the extra dollars, but I never escaped this priority of mine of finishing the job. Now, what's interesting is I run a risk because I have a budget amendment for PTSD, LB 972 on the budget. It'll probably be heard, and people might get mad that I'm taking time and not vote for it. So I had to make a strategic decision of let that get lost in the conversation about prison and profits over people and veteran memorial, and I'm just looking around the room of who bought bills that are in the budget versus right now understanding the seriousness of why this is important. So that's why I'm bringing it up right now, and that's why I'm asking people to yield me time, because we need to have this conversation. And what's crazy is in juvenile court, you'll hear a term of frequent flyers. And these are terms of frequent flyers because the last name is the same family, or their father or their mother was a part of the juvenile or criminal justice system. And it's funny how all of this comes together. I think whether you believe in God or the Spirit, you wind up at a point where I think it's all meant to be. And I recall a conversation in Senator McDonald's office. And I'm getting teary-eyed because I remember Senator McDonald and Senator Luann Linehan and others in the room just couldn't believe when I said, let's just get $25 million and give 10 families $2 million and tell them they can't come back to Omaha. And there was a prosecutor at the time in the room and two prosecutors and somebody else in the room. And we started naming the families. And those who were outside the system, Senator Linehan, McDonald, and others in the room, Stenner and others, thought we were joking. That's how embedded this problem of a culture and PTSD is, that we can name 10 families. If we remove them from Omaha, that's 70% of our violent crime gone. And there wasn't and that prosecutor is now a judge. There wasn't a person in that room who by the end of that night did not believe. That's how narrow our problem is, but how wide and deep it could be when it comes to this issue. And if you don't believe me, you can go ask them too, because the other people Williams and Center are no longer here. But literally, I can name those 10 families and we can solve a lot of our problems because it is generational, not because of poverty, because some of those families are pretty okay. But I truly believe now it's because of PTSD, that they seen their family member get shot in front of them, that they seen their trial of a person who shot their family member, and then the same day, another cousin gets shot because he was at trial and a fight broke out in the courtroom. That's what we're talking about. That's why this bill is so important, and the amount is not enough. I originally asked for $25 million up front. Now we're doing like $5 million a year for 5 years for a pilot program. But the academic research is there. But the problem is nobody's actually created a model, like a clinical trial on how it works. And so the goal of LB 792 and now this amendment is to continue that and create the model for PTSD. That the research has been done on all these kids sporadically and talking millions, but nobody's actually put it into a clinical form where we can do it. And because of Omaha and because of our geographical location and because of the concentration of violent crime in certain segments of Omaha, we can create that clinical trial and figure out if this is really it, because the data already says it is, but now we can actually implement it and show real data behind it. So that's what that's about. I want to have more conversations about it, and I'll wait till I'm back up in the queue or somebody yields me time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne and Senator John Kavanaugh. Senator Dugan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would yield my time to Senator Wayne if he'll take it.
Senator Wayne, you're yielded 4:55.
Thank you. My dream. In times of suffering and violent acts against each other, we need a dream. Not just any dream, but a dream in which people can make new meanings of the word happiness and salvation. Like Martin Luther King, I have a dream too. This dream is no longer like no other dream, but a dream of today, which we will make a greater tomorrow. My dream is one day that little black boys and girls can close their eyes at night without being scared if they ever see you again. Can sleep through the whole night instead of waking up crying, calling out your name because of a flashback of a dream of you being stabbed. When the phone rings, they are not scared to pick it up because they know it's not you on the other end calling from jail or someone calling about you. When they hear sirens, they know it's not you because they know where you are at, and what you are doing, and not worry about the gunshot they heard because they know it didn't hit you. Can you guarantee this? I can't, but I wish I could. That's my dream. My dream. That the streets will not be owned by guns, but by people, where little children cry because they fell instead of you or one of your cousins being shot. Where your sister or cousin isn't pregnant at the age of 15, but can have a happy family at the age of 30. Your sister, God's gift to man, is not abused or disrespected in any way. A place where you are not stereotyped as a gang member or a thief. You can drive down the street without being harassed by your protector. Cops will no longer need to have guns or need to beat you with sticks for the fun of it. A heavenly earth instead of a pile of rubbish we are. This is a dream, my dream. The biggest employer in your community, drugs, will be shut down. Jails will not be overcrowded, but will have a sign on the window saying vacancy. A man's characteristics will be valued instead of the money he holds. Where AIDS will not be known but forgotten. The words violence, war, animal, instead of human being, and bias will be used to describe the ways we were, and peaceful, nonviolent, and equal opportunity will describe us now. One day you will walk down the street that will be clean, not dirty, and people on the street will be clean, not dirty, and the people on the street will be working and not homeless. You can sit in school not because you have to, but because you want to. And at school, you will learn both history, equally educated, and everyone will graduate. As you look at society, you will see the intelligence instead of today's stupidity and ignorance. And you can be afraid, and you can be friends or a couple with any race without being labeled as a sellout. One day, every black, white, yellow, green, red, or even purple girls and boys will join hands and say enough is enough. We want peace on our streets, and we want to look at the other one as a brother or sister
1 minute.
instead of a Crip, blood, nigger, or honky. If this dream was a reality, we would end violent acts against our brothers and sisters, and we could walk with the holy, talk with the righteous, and hold hands with peace and salvation. I think I stole that line from another speech. I remember seeing that somewhere. This is the only dream. This is only a dream. But society crushes, I think I should have said, but society crushes it, and we let it fade into the dark. This is a dream, and this is my dream. Justin Wayne, 8th grade. Nothing's changed a whole lot in 30 years. And today we have a budget that's going to perpetuate nothing changing. At some point, we got to do something different.
Time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I stand in support to correct the journal and accept the challenge given by Senator Wayne to talk on two specific topics, one being PTSD and one being the prison system. I agree with Senator Conrad in the fact that this budget is not about our shared values. This budget is not what I expected to come out after all of the public hearings we had this year. And there is a disappointment on my end in hopes that we can make this better. Senator Wayne is right. Nothing has changed. I worked for the state prison system maximum security men's institution in the late 80s and early 90s. I was boots on the ground. And I can tell you, if you go back to when Governor Heineman was here in office, LB 605, that was to ensure more prison space. That was to tighten up parole. That was to create stronger restitution for victims, which Senator DeBoer is still working on to this day. LB 605, we gave $300 million to reduce the population, and by the year 2020, it was to have been reduced by 18%. 18%. This is an ongoing problem that we continue to take bites out of. We're trying to eat an elephant one bite at a time, but we never finish the meal. And we never finish the meal because we have this divide in our body, and we have for a very long time. We want to appear to be tough on crime, and so we lock them up. I don't disagree that people should be punished when they commit crimes, but if you look at the demographics, if you look at the data that's available, Nebraskans think that not only do we lock them up, but we rehabilitate them as well. These people that will one day be your neighbors are not being rehabilitated. We talked about there being no money in this year's budget for programming. Now, you remember that the previous budget did have money for programming. And in fact, I think we had to override the governor on it. It was LB 1012, but the programming's not been implemented. But that doesn't matter if we don't continue to fund that programming. And I was told by a member of the Appropriations Committee that corrections never asked for more money. Well, they don't ask for more money because apparently they don't have the staff to do the programming. But we can hire contractors. We already have organizations like RISE in the prison system helping with programming. I'm just baffled how for decades we think this is some confusing puzzle that we just can't fix. And as long as we lock people up and throw away the key, we are doing what we need to be doing as policymakers. And that is not true, because if we're worried about public safety, we have to rehabilitate those inmates. We have to have justice reinvestments. We need to make sure that we enact things that not only make us appear tough on crime, but really serve the real issue, the prison overcrowding, the lack of having resources available, sentencing reform, parole and release, reentry support, prosecutorial reform, alternatives to incarceration. Senator Lathrop stood on this mic last session, and Senator Geist torpedoed his bill. We have got to start doing better. And I would be sorely disappointed if I find when I'm watching this legislature in another 20, 30 years that we are having the same discussion. What are you waiting for? We've got the data.
1 minute.
We've had the data for decades. We just keep bringing it back for discussion and never changing it. When are we going to make it better? I also would like to point out, Senator Wayne, that I have a PTSD bill in business and labor that I've not been able to get out in reference to the Sonic victims who experienced a horrific murder of 3 of their peers, an explosion, gun violence, and when diagnosed with PTSD by a medical professional, found out that in Nebraska, we don't cover that under workman's comp. We can do better helping Nebraskans if we want to keep them mentally healthy by making sure that programs like that expand and address the real issues to meet the needs of Nebraskans. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. I listened to Senator Wayne this morning when he said he was 44 and he had to think about it. He said, oh, I guess I'm 43. I find that peculiar because I just 5 minutes before that told him he was 43. So Senator Wayne, wait till you get to be 30 years older than that. My wife and I had a discussion on the way back to Lincoln the other day how old I was, and we had to figure it out with the calculator. But anyway, Senator Wayne made a comment about the canal, and the canal is in benefit of western Nebraska and 500,000 people. That's an incorrect statement. The canal is vital to the whole state of Nebraska, 1.96 million people, not 500,000. 7% of the water that comes into the South Platte gets to Lincoln, 7%. So it is a significant thing, even for Lincoln, to have the canal. And Senator Wayne is trying to correct the journal, and it very well could be that Senator Moser did use the word "the," and so the journal was just printed as it was spoken into the mic. So we're talking about those people that are incarcerated and why are they there? And it's not difficult to figure out. There's a direct relationship with those people who cannot read and those people who are in prison. And when I was on the Education Committee back in 2017, the superintendent of Omaha Public Schools showed up at a hearing. And at that point, I think they had like 33 grade schools. 29 of the 33, the third graders couldn't read the third grade level. So Senator Linehan has said for years that up to third grade, you learn to read. And after third grade, you read to learn. So if you didn't learn to read by third grade, you're not going to have a very efficient time learning after that. So we need to go back and look at why these people are incarcerated. And it's because our school system doesn't teach them to read. And so the question is then, is there money in the budget for the prisons to do programming? What do you think the money for salaries goes to? Where do you think that goes? It goes to programming. And so we stand up here and we talk about the reason we're overcrowded, but we don't want to talk about the real reason why people go there. It's because they can't read. And I know of no one that spent more time and effort than Senator Linehan and Senator Pansing Brooks to get people to understand it's very important. It's vital that they learn to read. Vital. And where did they get with their initiative? Nowhere. Nowhere. And so we need to start looking at our educational system to see why we are failing these people. That is a big reason. If you don't believe me, just look at that schools at a glance put together by the LRO, and you'll see the results. You'll see the proficiency of our students when it comes to reading. And so, Senator Wayne, I understand your issue. I understand what you're concerned about. But you need to also keep in mind that we've made a significant contribution to Omaha in the last several years. I mean significant. And we're doing it again this year. And you've thrown us a few crumbs, and I appreciate it. But the fact is, your community has gotten a significant amount of money. So just be careful what you wish for. We have tried to help out in every way we can for those in the East as well as in the West. We're in this together. We're all Nebraskans. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Waltz, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I yield my time to Senator Wayne.
Senator Wayne, you're yielded 452.
Thank you. I had my staff bring up my thank you, Senator Walls. So people want to know how I got involved in politics, and then I'm going to walk around and tell some people to jump out of the queue, and we're going to see how this plays out the rest of the day. And I will quietly remind everybody that I have enough pieces of paper that we can push through every day for the rest of this session. I have no problem doing that. It's not a threat. It's not anything like that. It's more of a warning saying I'm at the table. I'm willing to sit down and talk. Let's figure something out. But how I got involved in politics was also my 8th grade year, Mr. Morrison's class at King Science Center. So there was this funny thing about when you check a box, you had to pick which parent you had, either black or white. You couldn't be both. That's changed since then, and I'm going to take all the credit right now why it's changed, even though I probably shouldn't. But so I end up emailing or writing a letter. Part of my teacher told me how to do it. So I wrote a letter to both Senator Dan Lynch, who is ironically Legislative District 13 senator at the time, and also Bob Kerrey, who was a U.S. senator. And I got a letter back from Bob Kerrey, April 14th, 1994, and it said, "Dear Mr. Wayne, thank you for contacting me regarding your request to include a biracial category on census information forms in the state of Nebraska. I have taken liberty to forwarding your correspondence to your state senator, Senator Dan Lynch, District 13, State Capitol." Oh, I actually never read this letter. It has the exact same phone number. Our numbers have never changed in 30 years. That's so ironic. Weird. "I appreciate hearing your views." And so we ended up having conversations, and it came down to this federal law regarding the census called Directive 15. I'll never forget that name. And it made you choose. And then just so happened, by the time I was in high school, that changed. It allowed you to pick other or biracial. So I'm going to credit young Wayne for making that change across the entire country, even though it probably had nothing to do with me. But I thought it was a good moment of why I got in. And the reason I got in is I remember talking to my teacher, and I said, I got in to politics because it was in 8th grade that I known that everything we do as elected officials has impact on everybody, including, in my exact words, was little old me. Now, I wasn't little. I've been the same height since 6th grade, but I haven't grown any taller, but I grew wider, if you know what I mean, and get a little bigger. But I was 6'3" since the 8th grade. I thought I was going to be a 7-foot NBA player. I found out quickly that I was going to be a college shooting guard, and that was going to be the end of my career. But yeah, that's kind of what happened of why I got into politics. And then my senior year in high school, I was hit by a drunk driver, and I lost a lot of college scholarships because they weren't sure if my back and my knee were going to be able to take it. So that, again, looking at the laws and how things were done kind of got me into law and got me to why I'm here today. So here's what I'm going to ask my colleagues to do. I'm going to ask my colleagues to I know Senator Frederickson's been waiting, so I want him to talk about some of the stuff he wanted to talk about. But I'm going to ask my other colleagues, let's pull out of the queue. We'll get on the budget. We'll see how this conversation goes. I'm going to hold the rest of my corrections for journal till tomorrow. And let's just see how this goes about really trying to make our budget be more equitable across the board. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Hughes would like to recognize 45 students and 25 teachers from Seward Elementary in Seward, Nebraska. Please stand and recognize they are in the north balcony. Senator Boson would like to recognize our doctor for the day, Dr. George Voigtlander, underneath the north balcony. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to give a special shout out to all the little Seward Blue Jays that are here today. I'm from Seward as well, so it's great to see my home county representing in the People's House today. Welcome to your state capital. And in deference to the leadership of Senator Wayne, as per usual, I will yield the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Dugan, you're recognized to speak. Excuse me, I have wrong order there. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate Senator Wayne's comments. I'm going to take my time because there's no time for staff to prepare any amendments. We got the budget yesterday. We were in debate all day yesterday. And so now I spent several hours on the microphone yesterday reading the budget, literally reading it, and then last night, and then this morning. And so any amendments to the budget are being worked on right now. This has been such a terrible process. Having less than 24 hours to do anything with the budget. So I'm viewing this time as a gift to staff, and I'm going to take the time. And do I have another time in the queue, Mr. President?
Yes.
I'm going to take the time because even if I can give staff 10 extra minutes, I'm going to give them the 10 extra minutes to get the work done that we require, because this budget, and the nicest, most PG term I can use, is a hot mess. So since this budget is a hot mess, and since we've had less than 24 hours to do anything about the hot mess, I'm going to stand here and I'm going to give staff 10 extra minutes to get work done before we get to the hot mess. So I've been reading the budget and I've been going through, and I'm just going to telepath some problems to the Appropriations Committee. There seems to be a view that cash funds are slush funds and that we don't have to fund government with the general funds. So I'm going through and I'm finding all these inappropriate uses of different cash funds. Colleagues, cash funds are set up for a reason. They're set up for a specific purpose. When we create a cash fund, it's to fund a specific thing. It's not to just set aside money for a future legislature to use for whatever they want. It's for specific things. And this budget does not acknowledge that reality. So colleagues, if you create a cash fund from now on and you have money set aside in it, just know that the Appropriations Committee can just raid it however they see fit. They can also raid things that aren't cash funds, but like the Universal Service Fund, which is funded by fees for service, and that they legally are not allowed to take the money from, but they did it in the budget. And if we hadn't caught that, and I know that the Transportation Committee is working on that, if we hadn't caught that because we had no time, where would we be? This is a hot mess, a hot mess. And our staff deserves time. So I am grateful that Senator Wayne made his motion, whether I think it's a appropriate motion or not. I am grateful for the time. I am grateful for the time because I have given you all time. I've been giving you a whole session of time and you don't seem to know how to use it correctly, like getting a budget out into the legislature with more than 24 hours. It is in our statute.
1 minute.
Or no, it's in our rules, perhaps, when the budget has to be debated. So this wasn't a surprise. Day 70 coming wasn't a surprise. But here we are. So I'm going to take time. I'm going to take the time to give time to staff to make all the changes that everyone who's been frantically reading the budget since yesterday, all the members of this body that aren't on the Appropriations Committee that have serious concerns, I'm going to give your staff and mine 10 extra minutes to do something about it. And then we're going to get to the budget and we're going to hear the Appropriations Committee talk about how hard they worked. You know who worked hard? The staff. The staff of the Appropriations Committee worked hard. They worked very hard, and they always do. They are consummate professionals, and I am grateful to them.
Time. Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, and you are next in the queue, and this is your third time.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am disappointed in the Appropriations Committee. I have genuinely never been more disappointed in any piece of legislation than I am in this bill and this committee amendment. And I am disappointed in every single member of the Appropriations Committee. This bill is horrible. It is unconscionable. And I don't care what your reasons are for voting for it. I don't care what good thing you got into it. You got a lot of bad things into it, and it's coming at a cost of the integrity of the fiscal solvency of this state. It is a hot mess. And I, for one, am extremely disappointed. Extremely disappointed. I'm seeing numerous accounts for TANF funds. We haven't increased eligibility. We haven't increased payments in such a long time. I spent an entire day, an entire 8 hours talking about TANF this year. And instead of giving direct assistance, the entire purpose of TANF, the main purpose for TANF, instead of doing that, we are using it instead of general funds for things that, while worthy, should be funded with general funds. But we're not using general funds because if we use general funds, then that takes away from general funds for projects like a lake, like a building, something shovel ready. So instead of using general funds for the function of government, we are going after money that is intended to serve the poorest people in Nebraska, 50% of the poverty level. That's what we're doing with TANF. Then we've got the healthcare cash fund. And I can't even tell you, I mean, the list on the healthcare cash fund of things that we're using blows my mind. It is going to be completely insolvent. But who cares? Because it's a cash fund for today. A cash fund for today, so we don't have to use general funds to fund government. We're going to raid this cash fund, put it in insolvency, and then what? Then what are we going to do when we don't have the healthcare cash fund anymore for the things that you've started deciding we're going to fund with the healthcare cash fund that should be funded through general funds? Things, mind you, Appropriations Committee, that you, members of the Appropriations Committee, specifically moved out of the healthcare cash fund. Page 53, lines 9 through 17, you moved these items out of the healthcare cash fund to the general fund Since I have been here, the Appropriations Committee did this, which means everyone except for the freshmen that are on the committee now were a part of that. And now you are moving it back to the healthcare cash fund to the tune of $5 million, and it's going to create insolvency. Why are you doing it? I don't have to ask you. I know the answer. You're doing it so that we can free up $5 million of the general funds for whatever project you want to use it for. The inappropriateness of this budget is startling. It is startling. And that is just 20 pages of Agency 25. Just 20 pages of Agency 25, and I am blown away by how
1 minute.
disrespectful this is to the people of Nebraska, to taxpayers. This is going to be a long day. And honestly, I'm probably not going to listen to the defense that the members of the Appropriations Committee have for this, because I don't think that this is defensible. I genuinely do not believe that this is defensible. I think that we are creating a crisis for our state. I think that we are being greedy with our funds. We are being irresponsible, and we are being reckless. But I look forward to having a great conversation with other people. Because Appropriations Committee, I lost a lot of respect for you in this document. A lot of respect.
Time.
Thank you.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to close. Oh, excuse me, Senator Hunt. Oh, Hunt waves. Senator Hunt waves. Senator Wayne, you are recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. One senator came to me and said that he appreciates because he's learned something new today on what to do. I will tell you that two things, if you are new to this body, read your rules. The second thing is get a Mason manual. Anything not covered in our rules is governed by a Mason manual. Know your rules. One, it could help. You never know what situation you're going to be in where you could help out somebody. But you should just know them, and I think it's important you do. Colleagues, I wanted to have a conversation about PTSD because I have an amendment coming up, but more importantly, I know this body well enough to know that once the budget debate starts, which my seatmate is going to start here in a little bit, tempers are going to get upset, people are going to get a little personal, things are going to go kind of south, and I didn't want this bill to be lost in that conversation. So I appreciate you guys today, allowing me, or maybe I forced it upon you to listen a little bit. I apologize for that a little bit, but not so much. But there are some things that we probably need to look at the journal and correct. I found at least a couple things that are just small grammatical errors, but when you are putting that together, that big of a document, I understand why. So with that, I will draw my correction at this time. Thank you, Mr. President.
So ordered. Mr. Clerk, are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
I have none at this time.
No, we're past that. Continue, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, first item on the agenda, Legislative Bill 814, introduced by Speaker Arch at the request of the Governor. This bill for an act relating to appropriations. State's intent defines terms, makes appropriations for the expenses of Nebraska state government for the biennium ending June 30th, 2025, appropriates funds allocated to the state of Nebraska from the Federal Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund pursuant to the Federal American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, as amended. Transfers funds, provides duties, provides an operative date, and declares an emergency. The bill is read for the first time on January 25th of this year and referred to the Appropriations Committee. That committee placed the bill on general file with committee amendments. There are additional amendments, Mr. President.
Senator Clemens to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the first of three budget bills we have yet to pass. LB 814 is referred to as the mainline budget. It also contains the capital construction items that we approved. And before I really get started with that, I had two other items I wanted to talk about. First, would Senator Mosier yield to a question?
Senator Mosier, would you yield?
Yes, I would.
Senator Mosier, there's been discussion as to what you said in the transcript of the journal. And would you have any comments as to what, if that was accurate or inaccurate, what Senator Wayne was trying to correct?
Well, with respect to Senator Wayne, my word versus the journal, I think I would take the journal's side. I compose my speeches as I speak sometimes, and sometimes I'll make grammatical errors, and those things just happen kind of organically. So I could be guilty. I might have said the.
Thank you, Senator Mosier. Next item, in previous discussion, been talking about lack of programming funding. If you'll look at LB 814, AM 915 is going to be the committee amendment. And on page 87, line 20 and 21, it says $4.3 million the first year, another $4.3 million the second year would be awarded as grants to organizations providing the following services: reentry and restorative justice programming for adult and juvenile offenders. That's $8.6 million. Then on the next page, 88, line 4, it talks about unexpended cash funds of $4.8 million are hereby reappropriated. So that's another $4.8 million. So that's $13.4 million that we've made available for corrections for programming. And I do hope they use it. We have a new director of corrections, and I encourage him to make use of the funding that we've provided. Now back to LB 814. I want to thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. First, I'd like to give special thanks to the Director of the Legislative Fiscal Office, Keisha Patent, and the excellent help from all the other fiscal analysts providing the necessary information needed for the committee to make informed decisions on the budget proposal before you. Your late nights and hard work are greatly appreciated. I also want to thank the Appropriations Committee members. There are 9 of us, and we have been meeting all of January, February, March, and April, getting this prepared for you. We had 75 agencies requests of budgets to approve. We went through those twice, and then 87 bills to have to prioritize with a limited amount of dollars. And I just do want to thank the committee, also my staff, my committee clerk, Tamara Hunt, my RA, Dan Wiles, my LA, Mark Freoff. They've been here many late nights, as the rest of us have been. And now back to the bill. LB 814 is introduced by the Speaker at the request of the Governor. It's part of the Governor's biennial budget recommendations. This bill is the mainline appropriations bill for the biennium that begins July 1, 2023, ends on June 30th, 2025. This measure includes budget recommendations for all state operations and aid programs. The bill includes the general fund transfers as well as transfers between specified cash funds. This bill includes the emergency clause and becomes operative on July 1, 2023. I think I will stop there, and so that we can go to the amendment that really becomes the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. As the clerk indicated, there are amendments from the Appropriations Committee. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. AM 915 is the Appropriations Committee mainline budget proposal. LB 814 was what was received from the Governor, but we've made adjustments to that and updates. And so I will start working on what's in the amendment. This reflects the changes that we made from the governor's biennial budget recommendations. And the amendment also includes LB 817, which is the governor's capital construction bill as amended by the Appropriations Committee. LB 817 was introduced by the Speaker at the request of the governor, and it's now part of AM 915. The bill appropriates funds for the reaffirmed and new construction projects recommended by the governor for the next biennium. Reaffirmed projects include those projects currently underway that have already received approval and funding previously, but were funded over several years. In addition to the new and reaffirmed appropriations set forth in the bill, language is included providing for the reappropriation of unexpended June 20th, 2023 appropriation balances for fiscal year 23 to continue or to complete projects. This bill, the capital construction, also contained the emergency clause that becomes operative on July 1, 2023, the beginning of our next biennial budget period. LB 814 was heard in Appropriations Committee on February 13th, 2023, and was advanced to general file with a 9-0 vote. Next, I'm going to refer to the budget book that was passed out. And for your reference, this green is called Martian green, according to the fiscal office, and pretty hard to miss. The first thing you'll find is a separate page called General Fund Financial Status. The financial status in the budget on page 2 has been updated. We had a couple of changes after the book went to the printer, mainly because the forecasting board, the Nebraska Forecasting Board made some adjustments to the net receipts items. But the book was already sent to the printer. Turn your attention to line 8 of net receipts shows the forecasting board, pardon me, forecasting board is forecasting for this current year $6.3 billion. That was a reduction of $80 million. Then in the first year of the biennium, starting July 1, $6.5 billion, as they increased that $25 million. And $6.6 billion in the second year was an increase of $55 billion. So those items, what we do with our budget, we balance our budget to the amount of revenue forecasts. We can't spend more than they forecast that we're going to have, and those are the limitations for our budget. The line 12, then, if you go to line 12, is general fund transfers out. You'll see in the second column, $1,062,000,000. $1 billion of that is Education Future Fund, and which is $1 billion that first year and then $250 million per year after that, which is the purpose of that is to fund the new state aid to public schools, which the bill for that is in a separate committee, but this would provide funding. Then line 13 is general fund transfers in. We have received some additional tax revenues from insurance companies, securities, fees that we receive. Then go down to line 20 is the committee recommendations. This is really where the general fund spending totals are. The first column, 32 million, are deficit requests that agencies had spending above what they had projected in previous budget and needed to be funding to take care of their operations. Then columns 2 and 3, 219 million, 235 million would be increases to agency general funds. That would be some state wages, Medicaid providers, University of Nebraska, things like that. The detail of that would be found on page 22 and 23. Then, let's see, go down to line 28. You'll see $714.9 million, which is the excess that we have after allocating the spending up above. But that is before any tax relief packages or any A bills, appropriation bills from other bills that came out of other committees. And I had a green sheet. Well, you'll have a green sheet provided with the agenda today, and that will show a total of A bills, which if you total those up, it's well over the amount of $714 million. So we'll have requests well over the amount available, and that's what we've done in appropriations is prioritizing spending requests and try to honor as many as we can, and we're going to have to continue to do that as the debate goes on. Then, let's see, I think then we'll turn over to the backside here. You'll see the cash reserve. We're ending up with a $989.9 million cash reserve fund, which is 16% reserve, and that's what we try to keep. We have a target of 16% of our budget to provide for future downfalls in revenues, so that if we have a sharp downturn in revenues, we can use the cash reserve. We call it the rainy day fund, and that 16% amounts to 2 months of spending. We spend over $450 million per month to keep the state going. So over $900 million is the target that we came up with to have stable finances in the future. General fund highlights. If you go to page 12, line 1, you'll see property tax credit cash fund, which is the amount that comes off your county tax bill. It's been $313 million now, and it's showing an increase of $85 million over the next 2 years to get that up to $395 million. There's an additional property tax credit against income tax of $548 million that's not in the budget book because it's taken into account in the revenue forecast, and that's an income tax credit. Page 12, third line from the bottom, also shows that education future fund I mentioned, and it has priority items to fully fund TIOSA, the state aid to schools. It's going to add special education, increasing to 80% funding, and to provide for $1,500 per student foundation aid. And page 14, just an item I noticed, community college for state dependents. That we will reimburse dependents of state employees their tuition to community college up to $1 million the first year and $1.5 million the second year, which
1 minute.
I was glad to see that. The University of Nebraska, people ask me about that. The increase of 2.5% each year for them is on page 195. If you want to see the amount of their budgets, it's over $650 million per year that we provide. Page 22 and 23 then would show you significant general fund increases, state aid to governments and individuals and agency operations would be, if you really want to look at general fund more detail, page 22 and 23, I would refer you to those. And so I thank you, Mr. President, and I urge your support for the budget as proposed in AM 915. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Would also like to have Senator Dugan and Senator Conrad recognize that we had a little while ago in the north balcony 25 students from Lincoln Northeast High School. They may be out in the rotunda yet, but they didn't stay very long. So we wanted to make sure we recognize that they were here, though. 25 students from Lincoln Northeast High School. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator John Kavanaugh would move to offer AM 1548.
Senator Kavanaugh, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to offer AM 1548, and I know we've already started this conversation about the budget before we even got to the budget, and I just want to say I know how hard it is to make something like this, and I know we all have a lot of complaints, or maybe some more than others, but this is one particular issue I identified with the particular budget. So AM 1548 strikes language transferring $14 million over the biennium from the Nebraska Environmental Trust Fund to the Water Resources Cash Fund. I'm moving to strike this language because the proposed transfer of funds robs dollars from that have been constitutionally set aside and placed in trust by the voters of the state of Nebraska, and instead uses it for agency funding for the Department of Natural Resources. It is very likely unconstitutional and completely unnecessary given the substantial sums of money this legislature is pouring into water projects. The Nebraska Environmental Trust was created by an act of the legislature in 1992. That same year, the voters approved a constitutional amendment to create a state lottery. The legislature distributed lottery dollar proceeds by statute to education and the Environmental Trust. In 2004, the funding source was placed in the Nebraska Constitution, with 44.5% of the proceeds going to the Environmental Trust, 44.5% to education, and 10% to the state fair. The first $500,000 of proceeds and the remaining 1% were directed to Compulsive Gambling Assistance Fund. Crucially, Article 3, Section 24 of the Nebraska Constitution now provides that 44.5% of the money remaining after the payment of prizes and operating expenses and the initial transfer to the Compulsive Gamblers Assistance Fund shall be transferred to the Nebraska Environmental Trust for the use as provided in the Nebraska Environmental Trust Act. The Constitution does not grant the legislature authority to transfer these funds outside of the operation of the Environmental Trust Act. I understand that there are some legislative intent language in LB 818 that would at least try to justify this constitutionally, but it would still fundamentally go against what the voters decided. The Environmental Trust is not a pass-through for agencies to use for funding in lieu of general funds. If the department applies for any grant through the normal process, the agency's director, as a member of the board, must recuse himself from the vote. According to the Legislative Fiscal Office Directory of State Programs and Funds, expenditures for the Water Resources Cash Fund may be made directly by the department or to natural resource districts to either achieve a substantial balance of consumptive water use or assure compliance with an interstate compact or decree or formal state contract or agreement. Funds expended for natural resources districts require a matching fund, local funding in an amount equal to or greater than 40% of the total cost carrying out eligible activities. I question the need for the additional funding given the historic amounts this legislature is appropriated last session and is poised to appropriate this year for water projects in Nebraska. Many have raised the alarm about the Environmental Trust Board withholding funds for worthy projects, leaving funds unexpended, perhaps for a moment like this, where the funds could simply be transferred to a state agency and the trust, which the voters of the state set aside funding for, could be bled dry. Because that is what will happen if the transfer is allowed to go forward. The legislature will have put a stamp of approval on rating the Environmental Trust, even going as far as explicitly authorizing this for future state legislatures. So wanted to get that read just as was, but bottom line is this transfer is unconstitutional. The voters in 2004 specifically put in the Constitution, and you can look it up if you like, but it's Article 3, Section 24, and it specifically lays out how much money of those lottery proceeds go to the Environmental Trust. We do not have the authority to change the Constitution here. We have the authority to propose constitutional amendments that then would go on the ballot and the voters could change, but we do not have that authority on our own. And so this is a constitutionally suspect action by this legislature, and I assume will be prone to challenge. But aside from that, even if we could do it, it's not something we should do. The Environmental Trust has existed since 1992 and exists for a specific purpose of environmental actions. And so we've talked about this before on the floor, and I kind of wanted to go through some of the projects that have been funded. And I thought I might start with some that were recently not funded. So the third one to miss out on funding when the Environmental Trust didn't expend all of its funding last year was Loop Central Landfill Association for a metal recycling program. So Loop Central, maybe in Senator Breezy's district, Senator Mosier's district, somewhere around there. Programs like this historically had been funded to help smaller communities deal with the cost of recycling. That's the type of thing the Environmental Trust is meant for. We have a basal groundwater management area, continued development of research demonstration sites of BGM for groundwater nitrate reduction. So groundwater quality, things like that. Some of the projects that have been funded, Pheasants Forever, Pathway to Wildlife, Ranchers, Farmers, and Communities, Rural Habitat. Next project, Rural Habitat. Next project, Water. Next project, Rural Habitat. In the Natural Resources Committee this year, we had a bill from Senator Brewer that had a very interesting hearing, and it was about how Nebraska used to be a great place to hunt pheasants, and now it's not, because, and the biggest issue was lack of habitat for pheasants. So you go to South Dakota, you go to Kansas, they have a lot more pheasants to hunt, and that's because they have a lot more habitat. And they have other programs too, but that's the types of things, not just it's for use and enjoyment of our environment. But that's the intent of the Environmental Trust. But I would also point to the other constitutional allocations under that Section 3, Article 2, or Article 3, Section 24, the allotment for the state fair. I don't know if we go down this path and we start taking this money from the Environmental Trust that the Constitution has set aside, is the next step to take the money from the state fair that's been set aside. Is that something that Senator Aguilar would be in favor of now that the state fair is out in Grand Island? I know you're listening, Senator Aguilar. But we start going down this path where we do things that we shouldn't, and then we normalize that sort of conduct. I know Senator Breezy, not to pick on him, but he's been a huge advocate for property tax relief. Would he be in favor of us going and taking the money out of the property tax fund that has been earmarked by the ballot initiative for the casino gambling in the state? Although that would actually be permissible under the Constitution, of course, because that ballot initiative was a statutory change and not a constitutional change, and we have the authority to make that change. But would it be advisable to change the direction of that money that the voters of the state approved casino-style gambling to direct that funding? So this is both a bad idea and one that we can't do because it violates the Constitution. It exceeds our authority. So I would suggest that we strip this part from this budget and not make further attempts to go against our authority on appropriations. I do think we should give greater respect to the work of the Environmental Trust, and we should focus more on making sure that they are doing the work that we've asked them to do since 1992, and we hope they continue to do in the future. Thank you, Mr. President. I ask for your green vote on 1548.
Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh. Senator Wishart, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of LB 814 and AM 915. In regards to Senator Kavanaugh's amendment, I shared concerns in committee similar to what he's brought forth in this amendment around the use of these funds. And Chairman Clemens will talk to the language that we included along with this appropriation to address some of the constitutionality issues. Colleagues, I want to step back and talk more broadly about this budget process. But before I go into that, it's a big day for some of us who are senior members of the Appropriations Committee. This is my last opportunity to work on a biennial budget. And I want to thank all of the staff that I've been able to work with over the course of the almost 7 years that I've served on the Appropriations Committee. It's been an honor of a lifetime to do this work, and I am going to deeply, deeply miss it. When I came in as a freshman senator, we were in a significant revenue shortfall. So I know what it means and what it takes to be in a situation as a state where you don't have enough funds to cover the cost of government, and you have to find ways to shore up those funds by utilizing the cash reserve and then by tightening our belt. So I know deeply what that means, which is why as a committee this year, we were very cautious about how we spent dollars, about how much money we left for the floor for individuals to utilize on legislative priorities, whether they be funding or revenue. And it's why we also left over $1 billion in our rainy day fund so that in the future, should we have another revenue shortfall like we experienced in 2016, that we have the funding available to be able to turn the ship around in an appropriate way without having to gut the important services that we provide to Nebraskans through our state funding. I'm proud of this budget, colleagues. This is a significant amount of work that went on with our committee, and I'm proud of all of the members of the committee that I worked with on this. This budget came out 9-0, and I will tell you, we are an incredibly diverse committee when it comes to political affiliation, when it comes to geography, and a lot of other things in terms of our diversity. And so the fact that this came out 9-0, I think speaks a lot to the balance and in collaboration that went on when crafting this budget. You know, there's been conversations today about projects that we're funding. Those projects are mainly key infrastructure projects that we are funding out of our cash reserve fund. And I want to bring your attention to that because this isn't on a whim that we funded these projects. We prioritized water, colleagues, water. I don't know if there's anything more basic in terms of needs than access to water, to the tune of $180 million for drinking water for Southeast Nebraska. $180 million in this budget is going to help Lincoln and the surrounding communities get a second water source. That's a big deal for our community. And then we invested in Northeast Nebraska
1 minute.
in terms of their water needs as well, and in Sarpy County in terms of their water needs. And so when you're thinking about the funding, the one-time funding that we did prioritize so that we could leave $700+ million to everybody here to determine how they want to spend those dollars, that's going to water infrastructure first and foremost, colleagues. I don't know a single person who can say that shouldn't be a #1 priority. And finally, I want to say Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney are 100% accurate in terms of what they're talking about. We are long overdue in addressing criminal justice reform, and they're correct that if we don't do something this year, by the time we finish building this new prison, we're going to be turning around and building another one. So I suggest that we listen very carefully to them and the package that they're bringing before us in the Judiciary Committee, and we pair that with the work we're doing on the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wishart. Senator McKinney, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise. Currently, I'm opposed to the budget. And AM 915, I don't support the prison. I do support AM 1548 from Senator John Kavanaugh. And prior, there was discussions about money set aside for reentry and things like that. It was set aside maybe 2 years ago, and we passed some last year to get it appropriated. Glad to see the committee is in support of that. But the issue with the money, and maybe I would suggest to the Appropriations Committee, or I'll bring the amendment, that you have to tell the department that it's not a reimbursement. Let it be a grant, because entities that do reentry are not well funded by philanthropy and other organizations. So they struggle to do the work and have to live up to a reimbursement. They don't have the cash. So either I'm going to bring that amendment, or the Appropriations Committee could bring that amendment that tells the Department of Punitive Services that it should just be a grant and those entities don't need to reimburse the state. Because just like this body and just like a lot of people across this country and this state, criminal justice related issues and work is not popular, so people don't really put money into it. So those entities are not well funded, and requiring them to have a reimbursement only further makes it tough and harder and a burden on those people. And it also prevents the individuals inside from getting the services they need. In the last decade, the Nebraskan prison population increased 21%, 3 times the increase of our state's population. Nebraska has the most acute prison overcrowding in the country. In the last decade, recidivism has not decreased. 30% of the individuals inside return to prison. This 30% is low, as it does not capture former incarcerated individuals who reoffend but do not go back to prison. If we do nothing on criminal justice reform, our state's prison population will increase by 25% by 2030. A replacement prison, as I've said many times, will not solve this problem. Our prisons are operating at an average of 150% of design capacity. Some facilities are over 200% of design capacity. We have a problem. We can't avoid this problem. And frankly, it doesn't matter where you fall on the political spectrum on this issue, in my opinion. It's a problem that we have to address. We can't just walk away and say, oh, we set money aside to build a prison. Oh, but we're continuing funding, reentry and things like that. But we're not setting money aside for programming or a study of what's wrong with programming in the prison system, why it isn't working, and things like that. It can't just be like, oh, let's throw a little $4.3 million at this and then just be happy. I'm not happy. That's not enough. That's not close to enough. And it's not enough. Put more money into it. Put more language in the bill that requires the Department of Punitive Services to do a real study on why programming isn't working and why we have so many issues. Let's do that. Let's add more money. We could find money for everything else in this budget. We raiding environmental trust funds for things like that. So the money is there. It's just
1 minute.
It's the political will there to do what's right. So let's have fun today. Continue this discussion on prisons. Lack of funding for child welfare, taking money from environmental trust. It's a lot of things going on in this budget, and I think it was wrong that we had one day to look at the budget, honestly speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Clemens, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in opposition to AM 1548. We'd like to discuss some of the reasoning here for the environmental trust transfer. I believe what we've done is constitutional. The Environmental Trust Fund was created with restrictions of its use, and the transfer we're doing is transferring to the Department of Natural Resources for the Water Sustainability Cash Fund for clean water projects. That is an allowed use of environmental trust funds. The fund has historically had large cash balances. They're currently about $112 million in the fund. And there's currently unobligated funds of about 67 million, I've been told. And we're transferring out of that 67 million, 7 million the first year and another 7 the second year. And that's been occurring over several years. With the increase of revenue from the Nebraska lottery, the fund is on track to continue to grow. And so we're doing this transfer, keeping it sustainable. And it's only for these 2 years. We're not intending to continue to do this, but we're only doing a 2-year item in this budget. There is precedent for transferring dollars from the Environmental Trust Fund to the Department of Natural Resources. In 2003, in LB 408, $925,000 was transferred from the Environmental Trust to the Department of Natural Resources Cash Fund. and there have been other transfers in other years. The intent of the fund is to assist in projects which have environmental benefits to the state, and the programs within Department of Natural Resources where the funds are transferred are going to have environmental benefits. Some notes I found, 2002, $2.5 million to Department of Natural Resources for interstate water rights. 2002, $225,000 for low-level radioactive waste cash fund. 2004, $1 million for water sustainability cash fund. 2005, $2.76 million to that was a University of Nebraska fund. And so we did discuss this issue in the committee, and we put language in that restricts the Department of Natural Resources as to the use of the fund to keep it according to the restrictions in the Constitution and the Environmental Trust provisions. When I was opening on the amendment, so I'm in opposition to AM 1548 and think it does no harm. On the green sheet that you have today on the back of your agenda, the back side of it will show that there are appropriations bills from other committees totaling $575 million of additional spending. And then there are revenue bills, which would be revenue decreases totaling $874 million. So on the green sheet, you have $1,449,000,000 of
1 minute.
Of lost revenue, one way or the other. We have $714 million to the floor. So currently we're $735 million short if we're going to fund everything everybody wants. And that happened in appropriations. We had 87 bills asking for $1.3 billion. And we reduced that down by quite a bit, maybe 400 million, something like that. We crossed out about 900 million. So it's a matter of priorities. We've tried to prioritize every request that we could to keep things going. And I would appreciate it if you would vote green on AM 915, but red on 1548. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clemens. Senator Brandt would like to introduce 30 students, 4th grade, from Tri-County Schools in DeWitt, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska State Legislature. Senator Slama would like to introduce 23 students from the 4th grade from Pawnee City Elementary in Pawnee City, Nebraska. They are in the north balcony. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska State Legislature. Senator Vargas, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you very much, Senator Dorn, President. Thank you, colleagues, and I just want to thank a couple of individuals here. Actually listening to Senator Wishart, I almost forgot that this is the last biennium budget that I'll be working on, which is incredible. And the fact that many of us, a few of us, have been on this committee the entire time of our career, which I think for most individuals, they're probably on the same committee they're on for their entire career. Some people change, but it's been really amazing serving with my colleagues in my senior class and working with our wonderful fiscal office and our staff, both those that are not with us anymore in the staff and have gone on to different things and retirement, and the new people that have been part of this year and the last couple of years that have made this possible. And we've had a lot of turnover, but that also means a lot of fresh new faces that are going to make sure that the budget is responsible in the years from here on in. So I want to thank the staff and my own team and staff as well for all the work that they've done. And to the colleagues, this is there's a couple things I want to comment on because I think it is important to get into the record, which is like many of the other committees, although this is much more, I think, focused, is this is the most deliberative that we could possibly get. We work for months on end for a series of 5 bills, and in this instance, really 3 bills, and it's a lot of give and take. It is a lot of work. It's a lot of listening. It is a lot of data and research, a lot of probing just from us as a committee and accountability on where dollars are being spent. It's a deliberation, especially since our committee represents the entire state. And it's not easy to come to a consensus given the makeup of our committee as well all the time. And when we do, it's a breath of fresh air. And so what you see in front of you is a reflection of that. That's the reason I support this. There are things in this budget that I support. There are things in this budget that I also vehemently am against. But within the process of this budget process, I also stand in support of the body of work and the package that we put together to try to balance all those needs for the state of Nebraska. It is by no means easy. And I say that on behalf of our new members that have been on the committee that are also going to be talking about different aspects of this budget, but there's a lot of good in here that I want to make sure is reflected for the public and for the rest of the body. We're proud that we are the funding that we're providing through K through 12 in terms of aid and funding TIOSA, the funding that we're providing to the Future Fund that is meant to then provide greater funding here in the future to make sure that we're meeting our needs and growth, our funding and aid to community colleges and growth, the funding for the University of Nebraska to make sure that we are supporting our public institutions of higher education, even some of the funding we've provided to the state colleges and community colleges, the career scholarships, which are meant for our new commitment, ongoing commitment to trying to retrain and attract people in the state to stay here and go to our higher education institutions. Our funding into our opportunity grants programs to make sure that we're doing continued more for need-based aid funding for low-income students. $10 million for funding recruitment and retention grants aimed to assist teachers, nurses, vets, and other healthcare professions. This is meant to make sure we're retaining more people, and it's building off of what we've already seen work from federal dollars that were used this last time. Water infrastructure. There's so many things I'm going to get on the mic. We're going to talk about the positive things, the provider rates that we're trying to make sure we are meeting the growing needs across the state. So I hope you'll support the budget. I also want to reflect and comment on what Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney and others have brought up. We need real reform that is going to make sure that we don't need to continue building more prisons. We absolutely need that. And I hope as a body, we support the Judiciary Committee's commitment and ongoing work to do as much as they possibly can to reduce the number of individuals going into our system and really focus on that rehab. There's a commitment on my part, and I know I'm just speaking for myself, but I've had this conversation with many members of our committee that we will do more what we can within the funding side. And I will work, and my commitment to Senator McKinney on changing the program for rehab funds to be grant funds and not reimbursable funds, because it's absolutely correct. That just makes it harder for some of these rehabilitation organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Vargas. Senator McDonald, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. To kind of follow up on what Senator Vargas was speaking about and Senator Wishart, we've served now with Senator Clements for this is our 7th year on Appropriations. Appropriations Committee is a 5-day committee. We do get focused on the work at hand. We do take a document from the governor. He proposes, we depose. As the numbers have been mentioned before, we have 75 agencies we visit with. They come in front of us. They explain things. They ask for things. We go through that process along with the 87 bills that have been brought to us by all of you on this floor. But this is the process we go through. And I want to thank Senator Clements for his leadership as the chair of Appropriations. He put a great deal of time in, which we knew he would. And for us, as the remainder members of the committee, the other 8 of us have made the work easier. Also with the fiscal office does a great job, and they had a lot of new people. It's not the same fiscal office we started with when we began in 2017. It was mentioned earlier. We did inherit some problems in 17, and we had some problems to solve, and we did that, and we learned from that. Now, knowing that the new people came this year, and there was 3 new faces, and the questions they were asking, you forget about all the things you go through and the things you learn as you go through that process and gain more experience. This document is far from perfect. It's not a perfect product because it was prepared by people. And we're the people that worked on preparing it as appropriations. We stand behind this document because we went through the process as fairly as we could. We listened to the agencies, we listened to the senators, we worked with the governor's office and his team, and they were always willing to visit whenever we needed that opportunity to ask them questions and try to see if we could make changes. So I appreciate the process. And again, not that the process is perfect, but now it's here. It's here, and it's up to you as our fellow senators to say, okay, we understand this, we don't understand this. We like this, we think we could improve somewhere, or we don't like this. That's fine, and that's part of the process, but it's now. It's now. You can either talk to us. The 9 of us are available. The fiscal office is here. They're available. We're here to try to answer your questions, but I do stand behind this document. I stand behind LB 814 and the process we went through with the Amendment 915. Not saying it's perfect, and not saying that we couldn't make improvements, but I do stand behind it as a whole because I think it was a fair process, and I think we had an opportunity to hear from, again, our fellow senators and the agencies and the governor's office and others. So please talk to us. This is going to be a long process, and this is where we are, just like we have in the past over the years. There's people that aren't completely happy, and there's people that want to make changes. Well, let us know. Come to us, talk to us privately, talk to us on the mic, and we will try to get your questions answered. And we will definitely, as we have through this process, continue to listen. But I do support LB 814 and Amendment 915. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator McDonald. Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning. I stand in opposition of 1548 in support of 915. That shouldn't come as any shock to anyone. So we hear numerous times on the floor of the legislature it's unconstitutional. We hear that all the time. It's not unconstitutional till some court rules it's unconstitutional. But if you're a lawyer, I guess you can say things that have more weight than other people. Senator Clements pointed out the fact that we've done this before. We can do this again. Senator John Kavanaugh was commenting about the pheasant population. They have plenty of money to do whatever they need to do to enhance the population of the pheasants, and Game and Parks does as well. Game and Parks has millions of dollars that they could use for habitat enhancement, and they don't. They have a reserve of $173 million, or they did have. So it's not a shortage of money that's a problem with these agencies. It's a lack of performance. And so the Revenue Committee determines how much revenue we get, and we get that from the Forecasting Board, what we should try to appropriate equal to what the revenue is projected to be. And Senator Stenner used to be the chairman of appropriations, and he would say, when we've appropriated every dollar that the Forecasting Board says we're going to get, he called that structural balance. Now, since Senator Stenner's not been here for a year, that has not been said much, but that's basically what we do. So Senator Clements put in countless hours working on the budget, far and above what the Appropriations Committee did. And I thank him for that, and I thank him for his leadership. And those people that worked with the Appropriations Committee, the staff, and the fiscal office need to be thanked as well, because they put in as much time as we did. And one day, I was, for lack of a better term, whining about having to go to appropriations for the 4th time that day. My roommate, Senator Holloran, said, "Remember, you signed up for this." I said, "Oh, yes, I did." And I didn't whine anymore after that. So we dealt with this budget numerous hours to conclude what we did. I think it's a fair budget. I think we thought through the process. I think we made decisions that are fair. And I understand there will be people that won't like what we've done. But it's an arduous process to get through 75 agencies and 87 bills and satisfy everyone. So what we've tried to do is spend the money wisely as best we could to make the best benefit for as many people as we can. That won't make everybody happy. I understand that. And Senator Michaela Cavanaugh said she's disappointed in the Appropriations Committee. I understand that. But that's the way things work here. Someone has to make a decision and others can either disagree or disagree, but in the end, we will vote. And if we have enough votes to approve 915, the budget will be adopted. And there'll be those of you who vote against it, and I understand that. But I will ask you right now, do not support 1548. And I would ask you to put a green light up for 915. And Senator McDonald rightfully stated, if you have questions or concerns or ideas, come and talk to us. But with the information that we had from the hearings that we heard and the agencies that made their presentation, we made what we think is the best decisions for the money we have to spend. So we will get this budget adopted. We have until May 18th, 80 days to do this. And we've always done this in the past. And I want to answer one question that was asked this morning in the briefing that didn't get an answer from Senator Von Gillerin. His question was, how much reserve do each one of these, how much cash reserve do each one of these agencies have? And the answer is, it's about 8.6 billion, but you got to take out the rainy day fund, so you figure it out. $6.5–7 billion in cash reserves in all the agencies of the state. Game and Parks had 173 million alone just in Game and Parks. So there's plenty of money there. In 17, we balanced the budget by sweeping those cash accounts, and we made no cuts at all on $1.1 billion deficit. So the sky is not falling. We will get through this.
Time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. There's a lot to respond to, but first I wanted to say, Senator Erdman, I think I coined the phrase roommate, but I appreciate you bringing it into more broader use. So Senator Clemens first talked about previous times where the legislature has taken money from the Environmental Trust, and I would just point out that all but one of those were before the adoption of this constitutional amendment, which means, though ill-advised perhaps, was constitutional. And the one that was after the adoption of the constitutional amendment in 2004, so the constitutional amendment was adopted in the election in 2004, went into effect after that, was the appropriation in 2006, which was LB 1061, authorized to transfer $2.76 million from the trust fund to the University of Nebraska Central Administration Designated Cash Fund for the cleanup costs of the University of Nebraska Mead Agricultural Research and Development Center. Sounds familiar. Cleanup in Mead was considered an appropriate transfer. You can go and look at the World Herald. Actually, I just looked up an article written by Martha Stoddard back at that time covering that, and there was opposition to that transfer for similar reasons. But I would say the distinction between that transfer and this one is that it went to a specific project that would have qualified for environmental trust grant, and it was for an environmental cleanup in Mead of a Superfund site. This transfer is to an agency with no specific project in mind. This goes to the Water Resource Cash Fund, which then the Department of Natural Resources hands out to other specific projects, which are not just for environmental projects, but they are for water management, water quality, consumptive use, lots of different projects in compliance with interstate compacts. A number of those things would not be allowable expenses on the Environmental Trust. And to be clear, the Constitution says that the 44.5% of the funds go to the Environmental Trust for uses consistent with the Environmental Trust's authorization. And that is not consistent with the authorization of the Environmental Trust. And so that's why it would be an unconstitutional appropriation. And to Senator Erdman's point about things are constitutional until somebody says they're not. Some things are just clearly unconstitutional. The authority of the legislature of the state of Nebraska, Article 3, Section 1, says that the legislature have invested in the legislature in one chamber, the people reserve to themselves power and purpose to amend the Constitution. The legislature have the power to propose laws and amend the Constitution, propose laws and amendments to the Constitution, and to enact and reject the same at the polls. So what it's saying is that the legislature has the ability to make changes to the law and propose amendments to the Constitution, not to change the Constitution itself. And then there's that specific other section that says how the Environmental Trust Fund, how the lottery funds are appropriated. 44.5% go to the Environmental Trust. That does not say they go to the legislature to appropriate as the legislature sees fit for things that maybe are within the sphere of this area and that somebody might think is similar. So, and there was one other point I think that Senator Clements brought up, which was in 2011, LB 2229 required the Department of Natural Resources to apply to the Environmental Trust for water management activities and to provide the department application 50 bonus points. So what that was the legislature specifically told the department for this similar project to apply to the Environmental Trust and advised or told the Environmental Trust, thank you, Mr. President, that to grant those applications a preference, which is still suspect, but is a different approach where the legislature is changing the criteria by which the Environmental Trust is granting these awards. But again, this is an unconstitutional diversion of funds. And I think when we're talking about the budget here, there's a concern about litigation and what happens if somebody sues and wins on a portion of the budget. That's an open question. There's not a severability clause in this bill. I don't know if we want to find out if this budget stands up in the courts as a whole product or what happens when somebody has a meritorious claim against an appropriation in this budget. So, Senator Erdman, you're right. Until a judge tells us otherwise, it might be constitutional. But do you want to find out in the courts? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of the committee's budget. Do I love everything in it? No, but I want to thank Chairman Clements, Vice Chair Wishart, Senator Dorns, Erdman, McDonald, Vargas, and I especially want to thank the freshman class of Armendariz, Stover, and Lippincott for the work they've done on this budget. It's a very hard committee. They work really hard. I am a little, like, they have not been hiding the ball. They've had public hearings. You could talk to them anytime you wanted to. I've been informed what's going on. I don't think I had two bills in front of the Appropriations Committee. One was to increase legislative staff salaries because we are embarrassing in how little we pay our staff. And the committee has included that in the budget. What else have they included in the budget? The education future funding, which is $1 billion. And then I think if you look at, I think if I know this right, Senator Clements said, Chairman Clements said this morning, $250 million for the next 3 years. That's for public K-12 education. And it's going to, for the first time, cover 80% of every child's special ed cost in public school in the state, whether they're in Sterling, Nebraska, or Omaha, Nebraska. Every child's going to get their special ed, which will mean that we are doing a better job than we have been doing. When you look at the green sheet, there are several bills on here, but I was going to ask Senator Wishart, could you yield for a question, please?
Senator Wishart, would you yield for a question?
Yes.
So, Senator Wishart, I spoke to you a little bit earlier. On the green sheet on the back, where they say that some of the bills that are on final reading or select file, this can be a little misleading, right? Because the Change Economic Recovery Act, which is Senator Wayne's bill, I believe, or Senator McKinney's, or both of their bills, That 545 million, some of that's already in the budget that's in this book, right?
Yes, it is. So Senator Wayne and Senator McKinney were smart in bringing two different pieces of legislation, one that went to urban affairs and one that went to appropriations. So we did fund a portion of the economic recovery funding that they had requested for East Omaha, to the $240 million to be specific.
Thank you very much. Other things that are in the budget that I think when I hear people say that we, profit over people, there is a significant increase in provider rates for hospitals, which I support. I can't remember how much it is each year versus the biennium, but it is significant. We have a lot of programs and good programs, and we should keep them, and they're funded in this bill. The Children's Health Insurance Program, Medicaid. This is not, get tired of hearing that we don't take care of people here. The largest part of our budget is aid, by far and away. The other thing that I want to thank the Appropriations Committee for is I remember a year ago when the bill comes to the floor and not a single person was, except for one, because they
1 minute.
piled amendment on amendment, got to speak to the budget, let alone offer amendments. So to complain about this appropriation committee means that you either, and freshman warrant here, so that's excusable, but you have forgotten completely how little we were basically told, hands off, it's our budget, vote it up or down. No one could even offer an amendment. So I would like to thank the Appropriations Committee for bringing a budget to the floor, leaving money on the floor for discussion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Duncan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, I want to echo a number of the sentiments we've already heard here today. I do think there was a lot of effort and time put into the budget, but that doesn't necessarily always mean we agree with everything in it. And I think that the conversation we're starting here today is one that we're going to continue for a number of days. And I think we're touching on some important issues that Senators Wayne, McKinney have brought up multiple times throughout the session, as well as other folks and the issues that they've raised. I think this is a really great opportunity to have these conversations. Specifically, though, I do rise in support of AM 1548. I know that we are talking about the budget as a whole, but I do want to make sure that I kind of refocus my conversation on the amendment brought by Senator Kavanaugh with regard to the Nebraska Environmental Trust Fund. I'll be honest, this is an issue that was raised with me relatively recently. So I'm a little bit new to this party, but it's an issue that immediately caught my attention because it seems like a real fundamental problem with the way that some of these resources are being diverted or utilized for different resources. I want to make one thing clear. This is not a competition over what's better between the Nebraska Environmental Trust Fund and the Water Cache Resource Fund. This is not saying that one does good work and the other does bad work. The issue, as Senator John Kavanaugh, my roommate, has pointed out multiple times here, is that whether or not this is a constitutional provision and whether or not this violates the provision of how we actually can utilize those funds. And even beyond that, if it is constitutional, which I believe it might not be, I think we have to ask ourselves whether or not this is what the funds were intended to be used for. Our Nebraska Environmental Trust Fund utilizes grants to give money out to cities, big, small, urban, rural, for certain very specific purposes. I was especially struck by the fact that there's a number of small towns that would not have a recycling program, but for grants that they receive from the Environmental Trust Fund. And so the Environmental Trust Fund is incredibly important to a number of these places throughout our state to make sure that we can fulfill our obligations to our residents to continue to keep Nebraska safe with regards to clean water, clean air, and things like that. And so when it was brought to my attention that there are currently grants that are not being fulfilled by the Nebraska Environmental Trust Fund, grants that probably should have been given, and instead that money is being sort of kept to ultimately be diverted to another fund, it struck me as problematic at best. I want to make sure that our environmental trust fund stays robust. I want to make sure that we continue to utilize that environmental trust fund the way that it was intended to be used. And if we are considering depleting those resources to the tune of ultimately denying small towns the possibility of having things like recycling programs, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. I don't necessarily think it was malicious that this was the intention. Again, I think that the Water Cache Resource Fund does really good work, but I think that we have to be cognizant of these kind of things, and that's why I really appreciate this issue being brought to my attention and why I join in Senator John Kavanaugh in expressing these concerns. One of the other things that he touched on that I think is also important is whether or not the budget would be severable if this claim were to be meritorious or granted in court. We're talking about the importance of this budget. We all have things in here that we like. There's things we don't like. But one thing we know is that as a state, we need to have a budget passed at some point in time. And if the budget is found unconstitutional by virtue of us including a provision that is in fact violating the constitutional provisions of how this money is allocated, that's going to leave us in quite the lurch. And I don't think anybody wants to find themselves in that position. And this is not meant to be fear-mongering. I'm not trying to scare people into supporting an amendment, but I just want to make sure we raise this concern for folks down the road. Thank you, Mr. President. In case this issue becomes something that we all have to deal with sometime in the future. Again, I would encourage my colleagues to go look at the Nebraska Environmental Trust, look at the way these grants are being currently rewarded rather. I want you to go look and see what services the Environmental Trust Fund currently goes for, because it really is essential to all of us across the state. This is not a Lincoln issue. It's not an Omaha issue. It's not purely a rural issue. I think every single person in this room has constituents that benefit from continuing to have a robust environmental trust fund. And I just want to make sure that this budget continues to do that. So colleagues, I would urge you to support AM 1548. I've yet to hear a compelling reason why not to. And so I would urge my colleagues to look more at the language of the amendment, and we can continue this conversation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator Blood, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow senators, friends all, I stand in strong support of Senator John Kavanaugh's amendment. I do support the underlying bill and committee amendment, and I'm hoping that Senator Dorn will come off of his perch there this afternoon because I do have a question in reference to his part of the bill. But with that said, I'm not going to talk about the legality of what's going on with the trust fund. I want to talk about the ethics of it. I was made aware of this actually back in 2022. I believe that what's going on is really truly a blatant disregard for the true intent of the Environmental Trust Fund. That intent is to conserve, enhance, and restore Nebraska's natural environment. So Senator Clements is indeed correct. In past years, some of the trust fund was used to fill holes in our state budget. And they decided recently in 2022 that they were going to be given priority over more worthwhile projects. If you look at this bill closely, friends, this shift is more than a third of the funds that they are allowed to grant out each year. And frankly, if the governor's office feels that their water projects are so worthy of these funds, why did they not apply for these funds like everybody else? Being part of the executive branch does not make you carte blanche when it comes to the piggy bank that we call appropriations. So under the biennium, this trust was authorized to spend around $20 million. But in 2022, it raised a lot of red flags because they only authorized $13.5 million in grant dollars. That means 35 projects, to be really clear. And the question that everybody had, and when people started calling my office, I'm guessing they called your offices too, and hopefully your staff let you know about that. They left money on the table, $7 million to be precise. And to put it in perspective, there were still 83 projects that had qualified that did not get funded, even though we had $7 million left. So when I investigated it, it was clear that the scoring criteria that was used had not changed. But all of a sudden, people that had in the past been given funds to perpetuate really good projects, especially in our more rural communities, all of a sudden the scoring had changed. So $7 million on the table, Scoring had changed. It seemed kind of like a red flag, and the optics looked bad that they were trying to save up money for something. Well, what a big surprise. Earlier on a bill, I think it was on the broadband bill and putting that in the executive branch, I said, just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should do something. Here's a really good example. Why do we let people jump to the front of the line when there's a process in place that they can request the funds just like everybody else? 87 grant requests, 40 deemed ineligible, even though approved in the past years. Why are we diminishing one fund just to serve another fund? That is not the purpose of the environmental trust. The one thing that I talk about frequently actually in the body is I wonder sometimes what senators did before they were senators. Senator Walz and I had that discussion just yesterday. I'll say, don't you remember in 2010 when somebody else was governor and they passed this bill and it did this and it did that? And she's like, no.
1 minute.
I was probably working, Carol. I don't know what the conversation was, but I have a very long memory for policy because I've known since 4th grade I wanted to be a state senator. It was very exciting the first time I got a legislative update in the mail out on the farm. But I just want you guys to know that a lot of you are just going to push green and you're not paying attention. Please take a minute. Go to the internet. There's been a lot of great media sources that have reported on this very scandal. Why do you want to perpetuate the scandal by allowing them to go ahead and do whatever the heck they want, be it right or be it wrong? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Brandt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would like to thank the committee for their hard work. I mean, for people in the state of Nebraska, maybe do not understand that the Appropriations Committee, this is all they do, these 9 people. So thank you for that. Today I'm wearing my green jacket. Why? It's not the Masters. It's because we're talking about money. Green is a color of money. And so that's kind of the theme today. So when we got our books yesterday, on page 3, halfway down on the cash reserve fund, there is we're spending, and then it says from the Universal Service Fund, $40 million. And serving on the TNT Committee, Transportation and Telecommunications, this service fund is administered by the Public Service Commission. And in this service fund, there are $129 million, and they have appropriated $132 million. When you get your cell phone bill and you look at those little taxes on there, one of those is for the Nebraska Universal Service Fund, and it's $2 or $3 that everybody in the state contributes. And that goes to outbuild in rural Nebraska. And why is this important? When I was in high school, and I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but when we would plant, we used a Alice Chalmers WD-45 and a 6-row Alice Chalmers planter, and you put a marker down and you went both ways. Flash forward 50 years. Today, we've got a 16-row planter with no markers, and the tractor drives itself. None of that happens in rural Nebraska without technology. This program gets technology to rural Nebraska. This is critical. When we talk about our cell phone towers and broadband and satellites, this is probably more critical for rural because as we have fewer and fewer people live out there, technology replaces a lot of our labor. And we like to think we do it better than we did the year before. But it's critical that we work with our partners in state government to make this happen. Would Senator Clements be available for a question?
Senator Clements, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Clements, why was the Universal Service Fund singled out for a $40 million contribution to the cash reserve fund?
I would say that we did see that it had over $100 million, and in the past, the Public Service Commission hasn't been spending it all, and normally it's not that much obligated. thinking there was those funds were not obligated, and we wanted to keep the cash reserve up to our 16% goal. We were expecting actually that the forecasting board was going to drop our revenues more than that amount. And I would say it was because of anticipating a revenue forecast that was very negative, but we were fortunate that the forecasting board did not reduce revenues that much. And so that was cautionary because we had to make these decisions before the forecasting board met.
Okay. And it's my understanding, I talked to you about this before I got on the mic, that there could be some revision to this. Is that correct?
Would you restate that, please?
It's my understanding
1 minute.
that there could be some revision to the $40 million contribution.
Yes, I understand that there's an amendment being drafted to change that transfer. Yeah, right.
All right. And your committee would be supportive of that?
I can't speak for everyone. I would not object to that transfer.
All right.
At this time.
Thank you, Chairman Clemens. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Brandt and Senator Clemens. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, still colleagues. I wanted to rise in support of Senator John Kavanaugh's amendment and offer some additional deliberations in regards to that particular amendment and measure, and then talk more broadly about the mainline budget bill before us and maybe reaffirm some sound principles of budget analysis that we can use as a framework to work through some of these challenging issues. So number one, I think at the heart of Senator John Kavanaugh's amendment is a clear understanding that the legislature should not disrupt the will of the people, and it should not do so needlessly or carelessly. And whether or not we like it, whether or not it's been a while since we reviewed it, this funding structure was put in place by a vote of the people for specific purposes. And those structures have been established to carry out the will of the people, and they have done so, generally speaking, without a significant amount of controversy until fairly recently, when a significant amount of politics were injected into the process of the environmental trust, subverting the will of the people and the intended uses to have a laser focus on conservation and environmental justice issues. These funds are now again under fire at the trust level and now as part of the budgetary process in an effort that not only subverts the will of the people, but shows again even seemingly neutral entities are being weaponized for political gain and pet projects instead of at the direction of the people to be invested back into the public interest, to lift up our shared goals around clean air, clean water, conservation, and environmentalism. There is no reason to have a raid on these cash funds at this time. Again, we cannot divorce ourselves from the simple fact that this is not a time of great economic recession. When we see those crisis moments in our economy, that's when appropriators have resorted to the last resort of shaking the couch cushions for every little cash fund that might be out there so that we don't have to have deep cuts in services and we don't have to increase taxes. We are not at that point. We have unprecedented revenues available. We should not be raiding cash funds to put together the budget at this point in time. And what that should tell you, regardless of how you feel about the Environmental Trust Fund or some of the other issues that we're going to be taking up in terms of substantive amendments, is this budget is put together with bubblegum and baling wire instead of a thoughtful roadmap for investment for our future now, for our state now and into the future. We don't need to have gimmicks. We don't need to play games. We don't need to steal cash funds from a sundry and host of different cash-funded agencies and pots of dollars if we have a clear plan and a clear vision to carry out investments on behalf of the will of the people. So that should be problematic at the outset, and risking additional litigation should be pause for concern. Pushing the boundary needlessly in a time of economic prosperity should cause pause for concern. Additionally, it's been said that we have plenty of money for the floor and we'll have other opportunities to take up these other issues. Colleagues, let me be clear. Generally, as I understand it, there's about $700 million or so available, quote unquote, for the floor for additional deliberations outside of the budget proposal. However, that's eaten up in like one tax bill. So
bill that allows for us to upgrade the radio systems for firefighters across the state. Currently, many of them, our volunteer firefighters, are working off of separate radio systems in which they cannot communicate with each other effectively. Fires don't follow county boundaries, and so oftentimes you have different volunteer forces coming together to support each other as they're battling a fire. And so we were able to put $5 million towards a grant program that will allow our rural firefighters across the state to all get unified on one radio system that will allow them to communicate with each other as we anticipate having to battle more and more fires into the future across our state, and the importance of that public safety investment. Another area that I wanted to discuss is the healthcare cash fund was brought up, and its importance of its sustainability. And just to brief the new members to this legislature, the healthcare cash fund, when I first started,
1 minute.
we were at a point where we were depleting that cash fund at a rate in which there was concern about its sustainability. In fact, this appropriations committee has worked for the past 6 years to get to a point where we have had sign off from those who have been following that cash fund that we are at a point of sustainability. So we have worked to preserve those dollars and move out of that healthcare cash fund long-term funding that should be obligated with general funds, and instead focus more on what the intent of that was for one-time funding. So I do want to put forth to this body that when we're talking about the healthcare cash fund, that actually is a cash fund that this appropriations committee has been dutiful in ensuring that we are setting that fund up and have set up that fund to exist in perpetuity for future legislatures to be able to support one-time funding that improves healthcare. Thank you.
Senator Moser just informed us that there's a group of, I think, fourth grade students in the North Balcony from Columbus area, maybe Columbus Lakeview, and we just wanted to recognize them before we adjourn today. Please stand and be recognized. Mr. Clerk, for announcements.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Judiciary reports Legislative Bill 14, 139, and 157, all to general file with committee amendments attached. Committee on Transportation reports Legislative Bill 124 to general file. Urban Affairs reports Legislative Bill 532 to general file with committee amendments attached. An announcement: the Judiciary Committee will hold an executive session in room 1524 at 1:30 p.m. this afternoon. And finally, a priority motion: Senator Hunt would move to recess until 1:00 p.m.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We are in recess till 1:00.